Hey, so we're back at it with chapter 2. This is Take Miss Ray Home with you. And today in class we continued schema, except we looked at different types of words, or I guess scenarios, with Esperanza Rising. We looked at change, we looked at family, we looked at, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, probably because this hasn't happened yet. So these are some different things that we looked at, different words, and we placed our own experiences with some of the things and related them to Esperanza from Esperanza Rising. So we're going to use schema again today with chapter 2, and we're going to jump right into it. Again, you need your book, and you also need something to write with and something to write on. The questions are going to pop up on the screen, so when they do, I need you to pause the video so that you have time to answer them, okay? All right, let's get going. So, chapter 2. Let's do a quick recap on what happened in chapter 1. We met our characters, Jordan, who is our main character. We met his mom. We met Tashelle, which is his little sister. We found out that Jordan has some conflict with his mother because he's not able to see his dad, right? And so because of that, he joined the gang, the Cobras, and we met the leader of the Cobras, whose name is King, right? So right now, Jordan is supposed to get a gun, right? Because every gang member needs to be strapped, okay? So now Jordan is trying to figure out how to get a gun, and I think he already knows how. He just needs to execute his plan. So let's see what happens in chapter 2. Take out your book, we're about to get started. Jordan had a secret reason for dropping by to see Grandpa that evening. After letting Jordan in, the old man sat down in his recliner and tilted it back. Every table and chair in the room was stacked with magazines and newspapers. Even the radiators were piled high. People in the neighborhood, knowing what a reader Grandpa was, brought him old ones. Jordan was in a hurry, but knew he had to spend a little time gabbing about this and that to make it seem like an ordinary visit. "Hear your mama bought that house," Grandpa said. "Yeah." "You don't seem too keen on it. What's the matter? You don't like it?" "It's nice." Jordan forced a smile. He didn't want to talk about the new house or Springdale or Mom and Tashelle right then. He made his choice. Suddenly he just wanted to back out the door and run, but he knew he had to stay to carry out his plan. "How are you doing in school, young man?" "Okay, I guess." School? Another thing he didn't want to talk about. For Mom and Tashelle, it had always been a breeze. He wasn't in their league when it came to schoolwork, and Grandpa was worse than Mom, always pushing him to study and making him feel dumb. Grandpa just couldn't understand people who didn't like school. As far as he was concerned, skipping classes and dropping out entirely, the way Jordan planned to do, was a crime. This conversation was drifting into uneasy territory, making him feel trapped and on edge. "What's your favorite subject?" Grandpa asked. What could he say when he hated them all? History, I guess." "You guess? Don't you know? What are you studying now?" Jordan looked at the wall clock. He had to get out of here. "Uh-oh, Grandpa, I just remembered. I have to run. I promised Mom I'd be home by 6. Lying was getting easier now. That is, with everyone except King. He wouldn't dare lie to him. "Mind if I use the bathroom before I go?" "Help yourself. Just jiggle the handle after you flush." So let's pause. Number 1. What is your schema? And remember, schema is your knowledge. What is your schema on lying? Now, we have all lied. Being that I'm older than all of you, I've lied a lot. So my schema on lying is huge, right? And when you really think about lying and your experience with lying, you want to look at, well, what is your prior knowledge to lying? Are there any consequences to lying? And does your lying hurt others? And really, why do we lie? Now, I told you guys about the story about when I said a bad word in the 5th grade and my mom was out of town for 2 weeks. So I hid this from my dad for 2 weeks. No one knew. And then finally, because my original teacher wasn't there, she came back and heard the news and wondered why no one had heard from my mom. When she finally called my mom, after 2 weeks of lying and hiding notes, I finally got what was coming to me, okay? So, there are consequences for our lies. Sometimes we get away with them and sometimes we don't. But in this case, do you think that Jordan respects his grandfather? Because of the respect that he has for King, he wouldn't dare lie to King. Remember in chapter 1, he held King at a high regard. So he would never dream of disrespecting King or lying to King, but he'll do it to his grandfather, somebody that he's known for years and years and years. So think about your schema. What do you know about lying? That's number 1. What do you know about lying? And maybe share a story about a time that you lied and what were the consequences. So that's number 1. What do you know about lying? And I want you to remember a time when you lied. What were the consequences? What did you lie for? Go ahead and press pause, but I'm going to keep reading, okay? Okay, Grandpa. On the way, Jordan walked into the bedroom. Since Grandpa had grown up during the Great Depression and didn't trust banks, his family often laughed and said that he probably hid his money under his mattress. Grandpa himself claimed he always kept a little something around for a rainy day. Jordan, his eyes on the floor, knelt and lifted the bed covers. He ran his hands between the mattress and box springs as far as he could reach. Nothing. He went around to the other side of the bed and did the same. No money. He searched the dresser drawers, quietly digging through Grandpa's underwear, socks, and shirts. There were a few small bills in an old saving mug, but not enough to bother taking. Jordan swore under his breath. Then something caught his eye. Sitting there on the dresser, between 2 stacks of old National Geographics, was Grandpa's treasured keepsake. He lifted the lid on the little square white box. Lying inside on a wad of yellowed old cotton was an ancient pocket watch. Jordan remembered how Grandpa was always going on about how precious it was. On the watch's cover, an artist had engraved a tiny picture of a southern mansion, a beautiful house with a row of columns across its front. Etched gold, Grandpa had called it. If it was real gold, it could be worth a bundle. Written in a fancy scroll under the house picture was the word Hilltop. Tiny flowers and leaves circled the house like a wreath. Jordan had to admit it was beautiful. He ran his fingers over it. Every Christmas and Thanksgiving, for as long as Jordan could remember, Grandpa had taken the watch out of his pocket and told the history of it to anybody who'd listen. It was some long story about how it was more than 150 years old and had belonged to one of his forebears. The word Grandpa always used. Then there was some more stuff about his great-great-grandfather who had been a slave and how he had run away from a southern cotton plantation. Grandpa loved family history more than anything. To Jordan, it was just some old moldy old story about people who didn't have anything to do with him. Jordan had mixed feelings about taking something from Grandpa that meant so much to him. But he had often heard him say that the watch would be his someday anyhow. With that thought in mind, he buried his guilty feelings and slipped the watch and its thick gold chain into his jeans pocket. Grandpa wore it only on special occasions, and with the box still there on his dresser, it would be a while before he missed it. In a few minutes, Jordan could sell the watch at the pawn shop and have the money he needed. If he was careful and did what the Cobras wanted, maybe he'd even have cash to buy it back and return it before Grandpa noticed it was gone. He made a thing of flushing the toilet and jiggling the handle. Where am I? When he came out, Grandpa was getting up out of his recliner. Bye, Grandpa. Stay a while, Jordan. We can phone your mama. Can't tonight. She ordered a pizza. Shucks. I wanted to show you the new genealogy chart Cousin Ned sent me. His fancy computer spits out ancestors faster than a chewing gum factory. He printed out all the known descendants of Uriah Henning. Uriah Henning? You remember, the first black owner of the Hilltop watch, your great-great-great-great-grandfather. Might even make a good history project for school. Jordan's throat tightened. Of all the times to bring up the watch, he had to beat it, and fast. Sure, he said on his way out the door. Show it to me the next time I come. He tried to sound casual enough to hide his jitters, and at the same time seem politely interested. But Jordan thought Grandpa was a little weird for wasting his time on such a stupid hobby. What point was there in studying dead relatives? On his way to Wagner's pawn shop, Jordan thought about what it would be like to move in with King for a month or so until he got that airline ticket. Talk about exciting. He walked without making a sound and studied all the shadows. No one on the street but a couple of women with shopping bags. All right so far. Nobody dare mess with him after he got strapped. No way, man. Wagner's was on the other side of the street underpass several blocks away. Mom would kill him for going down into that underpass after dark because the homeless slept there sometimes. He walked on, watching all the shadows, wondering every minute if he was going through Lobo turf. That's the rival gang, Lobos. And I'll put a picture up here to let you guys know what an underpass looked like in case you're not sure, because that's going to be important. He walked faster, hearing the scrape of gold chain against watch. He couldn't help imagining what Grandpa's face would look like if he happened to open that little white box too soon. But Jordan couldn't afford to think about that now. He needed the money by 6 tonight. Besides, he was going to buy the watch back as soon as he could, wasn't he? Jordan was heading into a poorer, more run-down part of town. Since there were more people on the street, he felt safer somehow. Up ahead, he saw the entrance to the underpass. Soon he'd have the money in his pocket and wouldn't have to think about what he'd done to get it. There were no turning back. There would be no turning back. Jordan started to run. Just before going down the underpass, Jordan stopped by a street lamp, took the watch out of his pocket and wound it. He'd be bound to get more money for a watch that worked. He set the time by the clock tower on the next block. 5:30. The watch's ticking seemed louder than normal. He stared at it, wondering if he should open the back and look at its gears. But what would that do? He wouldn't know how to fix it. Kicking aside the trash and leaves that had collected on the sloping sidewalk, he'd hurried down the street underpass. The watch's ticking grew louder and pulsed against his hand. As Jordan started up the slanted sidewalk leading to the other side, the ticking became intense and throbbed inside his head. He shook the watch, hoping to silence it, but it ticked on. The instant Jordan stepped up on the other side, the ticking stopped and everything looked strange. He had expected to find himself at the corner of Crane and Sutter Streets. Wagner's pawn shop and the clock tower should have been just across the street. But the street was gone. Instead, he was standing in a grove of trees. And the watch was gone! Jordan stared at his empty palm. He must have dropped it. But why hadn't he felt it slip out of his hand or heard it fall? Looking down at his feet, he discovered that he was standing in tall weeds. Weeds? At Crane and Sutter? His scalp prickled. He had to find the watch. It had to be somewhere on the underpass sidewalk. Jordan spun around to retrace his steps, but everything was different. The underpass was gone. Trees stood all around him. Overhead, patches of daylight struggled through the tangled branches. But how could that be? It was dark just a few minutes ago. His stomach twisted itself into a painful knot and his knees felt weak. He was lost. Maybe he'd stumbled into one of those city parks. But he couldn't have. He'd gone down into the underpass, then up to the other side. He knew he had. He whirled around again, looking for familiar sights, but there weren't any. The clock tower and the street signs were gone. Come on now, Jordan, he told himself. Streets and concrete underpasses don't just puff away into thin air. But it seemed that the whole city had disappeared, and so had the watch. He searched through the weeds near his feet, but it just wasn't there. Panic squeezed his throat and his heart raced. He staggered through the underbrush, trembling and panting. Birds sang all around him. Shivers crawled up his spine, and he yelled, "Help!" as loud as he could. A horse and buggy suddenly appeared and passed by him several yards away, but he didn't stop. "What was that?" Jordan shrieked. A child's voice said, "Oh, that be Dr. Byers calling on sick white folk. He ain't nothing to scare about him." The craziest looking little black kid Jordan had ever seen stepped out from behind a big tree. He couldn't have been more than 10. He was barefoot and dressed in a shirt that came down to his knees and was made out of dirty burlap. It had no collar or buttons, just holes for his head and arms to go through. And his hair looked like somebody chopped it off with a hatchet. Jordan thought he might be some homeless street kid. "Where am I?" Jordan asked him. "You was in the swamp woods." The boy stretched his words in a lazy drawl. "Swamp woods? Talk sense, man," Jordan said. All of a sudden, he noticed how hot it was. It didn't feel like November at all. He took off his jacket and tied the arms around his waist. "Where's the nearest street?" "Ain't no streets around here." Jordan didn't believe him. "What are you doing here anyway?" My master sent me out to find his watch." "Your master?" Jordan wondered if it was just a coincidence that the boy happened to mention a watch. Why did Grandpa's watch tick so loud just before he found himself in the woods? And where was it now? Sweat rolled down his neck and his hands turned to ice. He had to find his way out of here. Right now, more than anything, he just wanted to go home and have a pizza with Mama Tichelle. And since he'd lost the watch, he didn't dare show up at Baker's parking lot. King would kill him. "Hey kid," Jordan said, "tell me how to get back to Crane and Sutter Streets." "I don't know what you're talking about." Jordan grabbed him by the neck of his raggedy shirt. "Don't you hold out on me. I gotta get home." The kid was cool. "Careful where you step," he said. "Snakes everywhere. And if you hear horses and dogs, hide." Jordan sneered at him, then let him go. "Snakes? Horses and dogs? What a crazy kid." Jordan turned around, straining to see something he knew, but nothing looked familiar. The sounds of birds had replaced the roar of traffic, and all he could see was the kid in the sack shirt and the dark, steamy woods all around him. Vines and whiffs of something that looked like grayish-green witch's hair hung from the tree branches. Thinking that he surely lost his mind, Jordan felt a stab of fear shoot clear through him. Okay, so now we're only going to do one stigma, and that was lying. So easy day, right? So let's retract what we learned, right? So we already revamped and went over chapter 1. So what happened in chapter 2? That is number 2. I'm not going to do it this time. I went from start to finish with chapter 1 at the beginning of the video. So now for number 2, all I want you to do is tell me what happened in chapter 2 from start to finish. Don't just give me the big parts, but look over at the chapter again and from start to finish tell me everything that happened. And we also have a new character, right? That crazy looking little black kid is now added to our character list, right? So we might find out who he is in chapter 3. So right now just put kid. Put kid there until we find out what his name is. What do you think his name is, or who do you think he's going to be? Let's see. We'll talk about it in the morning. See you guys.